Well, hi, my name is Matt, and I'm the VP of TopLeft here, a unit of Kirchhoff Technologies, which is an MSP in the Vancouver, BC area, and we're going to teach about how to use Kanban tools and techniques to manage projects for for MSPs. So we welcome you here. We're glad that you've decided to come today, and yeah, thanks for joining us. So. um, what we plan to do is, give you a framework here to deliver your projects. Make sure that you can do them on time, on budget, and with less stress. And the team that you have today. Um, I've been with Kirchhoff Technologies, or KTI, and associated companies for about 10 years now. I spent that time involved in agile project management in a few different contexts and some software development in DevOps, sales, marketing, customer success, and so on. So we're going to be teaching what we've learned from a bit of study and a lot of practice here at KTI. So yeah, just jump in, tell you a little bit more about us. So this is the staff of Kirchhoff Technologies, a photo that was obviously taken some time ago. Let me tell you a little bit about what was happening at KTI that led us to build out the Kanban boards for ConnectWise and Autotask, which we now offer as TopLeft. We, as an MSP, obviously we were running projects, but it wasn't so great. Our project management practices were not great. We had way too many tickets that we had started and not closed. Actually we had like 400 tickets that were open with only 10 technicians. Our projects didn't move forward. We didn't know what was close to being complete. It took us an awful long time to close tickets. Customers felt neglected. Everyone was siloed. There was no teamwork. And all of that was happening despite that we were still using, a major PSA. We were ConnectWise users, and the tickets themselves were okay. They had the summary, they had a description, notes, and time entries, and so on. But despite all that, the overall experience was not good. So you need a lot more than just keeping track of your tickets in your PSA to be successful with project management. And we hear the exact same things from Autotask users, because both ConnectWise and Autotask just don't give you great ways to visualize and understand what your tickets are actually saying about your projects. So as our solution, we knew about Kanban and agile techniques from our software development background. We decided to try it for our MSP projects, and we found that it works. We've made some real big improvements. Now, even though we're still busy, but we feel under control, and we understand our own work, and our customers are happy. So we're going to teach you these key functions for project management in an MSP, the Kanban way to deliver, to do these key functions that need to happen to deliver your successful projects. So after I show you that sort of framework and explain how to do that with Kanban methods, I'll show you the tools that we're now offering that connect into your ConnectWise, into your Autotask, and actually give you these Kanban visualizations. So I'll show you that when we're done. And then I'll take questions after that. Anything about project management, anything about our Kanban tool, and so on. So you'll see in Zoom, there's a questions section. So you can type in your questions anytime. You can also use chat function if you need to. And this is being recorded, and we'll post it to our YouTube channel and post it on our blog. And since you registered, you'll get an email tomorrow with a link to the recordings. So yeah, let's get started. So Kanban in general. This is a Kanban board. This is the most recognizable part of Kanban, but actually it's not. Kanban is a lot more than just boards like this. So actually it came out of Toyota automobile manufacturing in the 1970s. So it was actually, a series of old ideas. It has to do with efficiency, reducing waste, and then representing work visually, especially with Kanban boards like that. And it's been widely adopted in software development, and now it's becoming known in more and more industries, IT industries and others, not quite broadly being accepted now too. So like to show you, here's a couple of facts. You probably heard about Trello. It's a Kanban software. This is already, this was some years ago. Yeah, 2017. sold to Atlassian for 425 million. That is serious money. Asana, you may have heard about, a project management tool that has Kanban. They're actually going public. This was from February. And yeah, so just to show you, Kanban is catching on in a lot more than just, manufacturing and then software development and then IT. So why do you suppose that is? Well, here's some benefits. So you can see your work in progress and you can limit it. And that is one of the keys to being able to, keep your work moving forward and understand what it is that you're doing. It allows you to be more responsive because you limit your work in progress. You can stop work from falling through the cracks because, the work is all in front of you. You don't have to go search for what's going on. It can improve your flow of work by helping you to identify and address the bottlenecks that come in any sort of team, help you stop feeling overwhelmed because now you got one place to communicate about your work uh, with your team. It is a tremendous communications tool. Never mind, just how it helps you plan as a project manager. It's great for communicating with your team. Also, you don't have to, go to some huge conference to learn how to use this. You can do it in a manageable way. You can adopt Kanban with small and manageable changes. So it doesn't have to be a big job and, take 6 months of your time to begin adopting this. So this webinar is specifically for MSP project managers. So, you may have done a little bit of, well, you may have done any amount of research on Kanban and agile techniques and found that a lot of the material out there is very conceptual or it's geared towards software development or operations. And so there's not a lot for project managers specifically at MSPs. So it can kind of leave you feeling like you understand the concepts and the ideas, but you don't really know what next steps to take. So we're going to actually show you all these next steps and give you a really clear framework about how to lay this out. So it's for specifically MSP project managers. Now, in terms of sort of pretty typical MSP size. You got 5 people in a team. You're working on 20 projects at a time. Maybe or a large MSP. You got 25 people working on 100 projects. Is going to work for that too. Now, it's not I'm not trying to give you a complete methodology here. Everything you've learned about quality and communications and risk management and so on. You're going to keep that. You're going to need that, and it's not really for about 20. If you got a huge project, 20 people working on a single project, it's not really for that. Wouldn't recommend that because that's not really common for the MSPs who are using ConnectWise and Autotask and so on. So let me lay this out. So this is the framework. Pretty simple. It's a cycle. So you're going to do do these tasks and then you're going to repeat. So it's pretty simple. First, you identify your projects. Then you break down your work, you estimate it, then you get that assigned to the engineers, and while the engineers are working on those specific things, you're going to monitor it, and then you repeat. Do you remember that? Look at the IBEAM. Start of those words there. Remember that as IBEAM, and that's an easy way to remember it. We'll come back to that again at the end. So a little bit more detail about this phase. We have quite a bit of detail about each of these steps here. So now in terms of the cycle and how frequently do we do it, there's 2 choices. And if you've done any kind of learning about your Agile on your own, then you'll probably recognize these 2 terms, Scrum. Well, of course, Kanban, but also Scrum. So Scrum is a very specific and very commonly used methodology, and it calls for sprints. So basically, you split your work into what they call sprints. Typically 1 to 2 weeks. You could do longer. Some people even do shorter, but 1 to 2 weeks is pretty typical. And basically, you plan out your work, and then you execute this work in these sprints, whatever length you choose. And so if you're doing that style of Scrum, then you're going to that's going to be the frequency of your cycle. You might do that because it's more predictable. Basically, in every sprint, you choose some work to do, and you get the engineers to do that. So it's more predictable. And the important part is you really don't allow any changes to happen within those sprints. All the changes got to happen, as you prepare for the next sprint. Uh, the other way to do it is, more Kanban style, which is just kind of continually, you're just kind of continually doing this phase, and you might do a little bit of that cycle every day even. So you might do a couple cycles a week, or a cycle in 2 weeks, depending on what you need. And it's a lot more flexible. So if you need more flexibility, don't worry about Scrum, choose the Kanban model. If you need more predictability for whatever reason, then you might look at Scrum. And certainly there's a lot of information, more information about Scrum that I won't be covering here. So those are your two main choices there. So let's go into the first part of this cycle, where we identify the projects. So, what's a project? It's anything driven primarily by you, as a project manager. You're the expert there, not driven by the client. So it contrasts with like help desk work there, obviously, because the client there is asking you for specific things. They kind of know what they want. But here, they want an outcome, and you present the project to deliver that. And you're the expert in how that actually gets delivered. So, projects, they have multiple tasks, usually multiple engineers working on it. And if you've done things right, it's going to have a clear scope and then, schedule agreement with the client. When you're identifying the projects, you do need to include internal projects. For example, maybe you're migrating to a new RMM solution. Basically, anything that your project team is working on, it's got to be included here, because you only got a limited team. And so if you're excluding a big part of your work for, just because it's internal work, then you're going to have problems understanding what you've committed to. So you do need to include internal work here. So here's how you would make use of Kanban here. You make what is called a swim lane. So it's basically just a horizontal lane. Right now, it doesn't even have any columns on it. We'll get to those in the next step. But basically, you just get this horizontal lane. You make one lane for each project that you're working on. So you've identified the projects, then just list them. And on here, you're going to put like suppose that this is a wall or a whiteboard or something. Now later, you're going to figure out the work, and you're going to put sticky notes describing the work in these swim lanes here. But this gives you the framework for understanding all of the projects that you're working on right now, or at least the projects that you know about. Just because they're listed here may not mean that you're actually going to be working on them very soon, like even in the next sprint. But you do need them listed here. So that's it for that phase of the cycle. Then we get to the break down the work cycle. So this is just the part of actually making the tickets and tasks that describe the work. Now, as a project manager, this may be the biggest part of the phase here, because you're going to be thinking about, okay, how do we actually deliver this project? So let's talk about the details of that. You're making the tickets, or the tasks, whatever you call it, for the project work. How much work do you actually do in this phase? Well, you're going to make tickets for the next major phase or milestone of work in each project. So and then you're going to plan the whole milestone out at a time. Now it's up to you, how you define these milestones. Small projects may only have the one milestone, one phase. Larger milestones, larger projects are going to have multiple milestones, and they're just kind of a meaningful section of work where you can deliver that, and then you come back to the customer and say, okay, how are we doing so far? This is what you got. How are we doing? Do you want to continue to the next phase? You're not going to plan out the whole project if it's multiple milestones or phases. That's not really agile. It could be that you get to if you plan out 3 phases in a project, what happens if you get to the end of the first phase and the customer is like, we ran out of money, or our environment's changed and the rest of the project doesn't make any sense anymore, or for whatever reason they cancel it. Now you've done all this planning work, and you're going to waste that. So that's not agile. So avoid doing that. Now, who does this work? Well, it's got to be somebody familiar with all the technical issues at a pretty detailed level. It's going to be either the engineers who are eventually going to actually do the work. So you could have engineers helping you here, or if you as a PM has come out of from an engineering background, then you can do it. But if you are just a dedicated project manager, and that's your specialty, and you don't come from a technical background, then you're going to need to get help to do this. Ideally, you might be doing some of these projects over and over, like MSPs frequently do. Like exchange migrations. You know, you sell that, you do these same project over and over for different customers. So if you do that, you can actually make a template. You become an expert in this sort of project, and then you don't got to worry about it. It's kind of work that you do just once. And so that's great if you can do that. But in any case, whether it's the first time you're doing a project that you're going to do over and over, or if it's just a one-time project, whoever's doing this has to be familiar with that. As a project manager, your responsibility is just making sure that it gets done. The biggest risk here is don't miss anything. If you've ever, I'm sure you're all familiar with, what projects that just go way over scope. And the biggest reason for that is that you didn't plan out the whole thing, or the next phase, and you missed something. And it turns out there's more work to do. So be very, very careful. And basically that's why you do this one milestone or one phase at a time, is because that gives you a whole picture of what you're planning to do, at least to do soon, and it helps you not miss anything. So in terms of if you're using ConnectWise or Autotask to fill out these tickets, let's talk about what fields you're actually going to fill out. So you're going to use these fields, the summary and the title, obviously, the description and the tasks, because you need to lay out what this ticket actually is. You're going to use the due date only if there's a constraint imposed from the outside, or it could be like the contract that we signed with the customer says we're going to do it by this date. Okay, well, that's a good reason. It could be that it has to do with a conference that happens on a certain date. Well, it's definitely due there. You're not going to set the due date if it's only for the purpose of juggling the work and managing when does this work happen. That's not what the due date is for. Priority, you can set it, but almost for project management, almost everything is just kind of a normal priority at the beginning at least. And you go ahead and set any other fields that you're actually going to use. If you don't feel like you need to go and just set every field in your PSA just because that's what a professional project manager does. If you're not going to actually make use of these fields at some point, don't bother setting them. That's wasteful. That's not that's not agile. So only set these fields like subtype, item, and things like that. Only set those if you're actually going to make use of that. Now, fields that you're not going to set at all, you're not going to set the start date, because that's not agile. That's kind of pushing work to engineers. If if it has to be started on a certain date, regardless of whatever other things that might be happening at the time. You're not going to set the duration. That's also push. You don't, at this stage, you're not going to set budget, estimate, story points, and things like that, and you're not going to assign it just yet. You will do those things, but those two will come later. Now let's talk about the size of the ticket, because I find that in working with MSPs, this is something that a lot of folks struggle with. So let's talk about what is the size of a good ticket. So tickets should be kind of one cohesive unit of value for a customer. I mean, like kind of a building block, something that can be added or removed or changed. About how the client is set up. That doesn't really depend on much else. So as an example. Let's say that you had a network upgrade project. You might think about having a ticket that would be like install the new office router, but that's too big. What would be better in that case is having separate tickets for ordering the router once you've determined what you need, configuring it, and then which you do in your office, and then finally you go and put it on site. You actually install it. So instead of just one big ticket for installing it, when we can already easily identify at least 3 different stages of that work, really ought to be 3 different tickets. That there are some dependencies. I mean, there are dependencies between them, but each of those is a pretty cohesive. You know when you start and you know when you finish. Ideally, a ticket should be able to be done by one technician in one sitting. So that's also a good thing to consider. If it's gonna, if you can see from the beginning that a ticket is gonna be open for a week or 2 weeks or whatever, because it includes so much work, then it's probably better to try to split it up somehow. Same thing, if you can see from the beginning that the scope of the ticket requires like one engineer to do some work and then another engineer to do some related work, that would be better as 2 separate tickets. Now that doesn't include the case where the work that the second engineer does is just reviewing the work that the first engineer did. So that is actually a separate stage of work in that ticket. You know, first do the work and then someone reviews it. So that doesn't apply. But if you can see that it's like two separate elements of work, better to make that 2 tickets. If you have any doubt, it's safe to err on the side of 2 small tickets. I've seen many MSPs with 2 large tickets versus 2 small tickets. Now, if you know, like the consequence of having 2 small tickets is that you're just kind of clicking around in your PSA too much. There's just kind of too much management work there. So if you feel like you're doing that, then okay, maybe you did make them too small. But it's almost always safer to err on the side of 2 small tickets. Yeah, almost without exception, they should be at most 2 days of work. Okay, the only exception to that is if it's really unprecedented, risky work, and the customer has unlimited budget. Basically, nobody else in the world has ever done this sort of thing before. And so it's really, you know, prototyping and very uncertain. If that's the case, go ahead. Other than that, 2 days of work at the most. You know, I've seen customers with like 80 hours logged on a ticket, and there's no way to know a ticket like that. Like, is it close to being done? Like, how is it impacting other work in this project, and so on. So, you know, always at the most 2 days of work. And as far as, you know, the distinct, like the scope of that and describing what's involved in that ticket, the description, it's got to be really clear. So you, as the PM, the engineers, and the client have the same understanding of what it's done. The time for describing the scope of that work is before the ticket, is in this phase, figuring out what does this ticket actually include. You know, if you find yourself the engineer having finished the ticket and the engineer says it's done, and you as the PM or, you know, the client comes in and says, well, I don't think that's done, then that's, you know, it's not a problem with what the engineer did if the ticket is unclear. So make sure that that's clear so everybody agrees when it's done. You can, what we found it works really well is like you literally make a checklist. And you can, you know, there's functions in your PSA for doing that sort of thing, or you just put it all in the description. You just say, hey, here's when it's done. And maybe it's just 1 item if it's a simple ticket, or maybe, you know, it's up to about 10 items. And, you know, your engineer can check them off as they complete them. So here's how you'd use Kanban. You're gonna, you know, if it's on a wall, you're just gonna take a sticky note. You're gonna put a little description of that ticket. You know, write the title on there and stick them in the column here. Notice we only have 1 column right now. It's just the backlog, and you put them in and you rank them. So basically, you know, this you're going to put them in some meaningful order. So if an engineer was going to do it, and they'll do it later in the process, but if you had to get that done, then, you know, you do it in this order, you know, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or something. So you're not just tossing them on there. They are kind of in order of importance. Okay, now we get to the third part of our project management cycle where you estimate this. So this is where you make, you know, your budget, estimated hours, story points, or whatever you're using for an educated decision about, like, how do you prioritize and assign this work? Sometimes it's nice, like if you have freedom about which tickets get done first, sometimes it's nice to just get the smallest ones done first so you can start to show some progress right away. And you can do that after you've done some basic estimation work. Now, I use the term story points. You may not be familiar with that. That is kind of an idea that mostly comes from certain agile frameworks, especially Scrum. And the idea there is that instead of thinking about the number of hours that it's going to take to do this ticket, instead you measure story points, and it's just kind of it's just a number. Although there are some other ways to do it as well. But, you know, most common way is just you pick a number, and it's just a measure of sort of the complexity of that ticket relative to all of the other tickets. You know, some people just, to try to keep it simple, use, you know, Fibonacci sequence, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on, where, you know, higher numbers are more complex. So the advantage of this is that when you or, you know, the engineers in your team are kind of looking at these tickets and trying to estimate how complex they are, ideally everybody should be able to look at that and kind of agree on how many, like how complex it is compared to other tickets there, no matter how much experience they have. Now, if you're looking at the hours, a junior engineer would look at a ticket and say, well, that's more hours. Whereas a senior engineer would look at that and be like, okay, that's not very many hours. So hours depends on who does the work, whereas story points doesn't depend on that. so that can be one reason that you might want to use story points. Just to keep things simple, I'll stick mostly to hours here, but just be aware that that's kind of an improvement that some MSPs have found a lot of power in using story points. So how much do we actually do as far as estimating work? Well, we're gonna estimate the work that needs to be done kind of soon. So if it's Scrum, that's at least one future sprint's worth. If it's Kanban, you just need to kind of make sure that those queues that the engineers are going to pull from to do their work, just make sure those don't get empty. So that's all you're going to do. We're not, we don't need to do the whole milestone, and certainly not the whole project's worth. Now, again, who does this? Well, kind of the same thing as far as defining this work or figuring out which tickets need to be done. The team or the individual who could do the work, they got to have some familiarity with the project and the technology, obviously. So, project manager doesn't have to do this. They just are mainly responsible for getting it done. So you might ask, why is this separate? Like, if we have the same people doing this work, the estimation work, as the people who kind of worked in the breakdown stage, why is it a separate stage? Well, that's a good question. And the answer is that it delays this part of the work until all the scope changes are probably done. You've started your cycle, and the engineers are already working on some parts of this project, which have gone through the estimation stage and all the other stages by that point. And now you're following up with some of the later tickets and doing estimation. Now, since the engineers are already working on this, now if you wait until this stage to do this, you've got more information about this project, and you might be able to find that your estimates were incorrect. Not incorrect, but because they're estimates, right? They can't be incorrect. But maybe, let's say, unrealistic. And now that the engineers are actually working on this project, you can actually say, it looks like the actual work is coming out above the estimates, more time, or they're coming out below the estimate. And you can use that information, things that you're learning in the first tickets of the project, to inform these later tickets on the project. So that's a good reason. Well, and also because, again, it could be that the project gets canceled, and if that happens, or even just delayed or whatever. And if that happens, any estimation work that you've done on work that ends up not being done, that's just a waste. So it's better to wait for this phase for those two reasons. Again, if you find out, you do some estimation work and you're using hours instead of story points, then if you come out at 2 days or more, then you got to break that ticket down further. So here's how you would use that in Kanban. So you're going to, you have your tickets in the backlog here. Now you're going to make 2 extra columns. You're going to have needs estimation and then ready. So tickets are going to move. You're going to move them from backlog to needs estimation, and that's when you see, they're part of the next sprint, or I need to kind of keep the queues filled for the engineers to work on. So you pull them over to needs estimation, and then at some point, you or one of the engineers is going to, or sometimes the whole team estimates those, and you just put a number on them, story points, hours, whatever you want, and you pop them over into the ready stage. And so this is where engineers know, like, there's a bit more to it, but eventually they know that they can begin this work because it's ready to go. Okay. The next phase of the cycle is to get this work assigned. So this is that trigger that makes that work actually get done, putting it into some queue where an engineer will see that and they'll actually work on it. Ideally, when we do this, we want to minimize the constraints, to minimize the bottlenecks in our team. So, like, the constraints as far as from my engineering team, considering the technicians and the clients we have and the projects and so on, how many of the engineers can work on all of these tickets? Or is some of this work really specialized, and so I actually only have one engineer who can work on this specific client or project or whatever? The more you have these sorts of constraints where not every ticket can be worked on by any engineer, so the more sort of constraints like that you have, then the more bottlenecks you're going to have. You might find that more of your work is going to your senior engineers, and they can start to become a bottleneck when when you have too much work that can only be done by 1 or 2 people. So that becomes a bottleneck, and that slows you down. That kind of limits the velocity, the overall velocity of your team. Even though maybe you have lots of junior engineers, but you only have 1 or 2 people who can work on some complicated senior sort of stuff. That's going to slow your entire team down. So ideally, you're going to have all of your technicians able to work on all of your work that you have, clients and projects and so on. That's the ideal world. I know that doesn't happen in the real world, but to help you to help reach that, you're going to be looking at things like documenting all your projects and clients the same, so that anybody can jump into any project, and also, of course, training to kind of build up these junior engineers into more senior engineers. Now, I know it's not possible to and some people may say it's not even desirable to do that. But that sort of thing, as much as you can do, helps you minimize those bottlenecks and makes your job as a project manager a lot easier. Now, as far as which tickets to assign, consider project due dates, ticket due dates, milestone due dates, and so on. And the overall project, like how important is this project and the size of the project and whatnot, whatever might make a certain project high priority for your company right now. So those are going to be the tickets that you're going to assign, because that's what makes an engineer actually do that. You also need to kind of consider, so you're going to, when you're thinking about who to assign to a ticket, you're going to look at, the constraints that I discussed, the current load of the engineers. So if you've got one engineer who's really busy and one engineer who's not, you may not want to assign something to the busy engineer if you don't have to. And just their general availability, things that they're working on that aren't project work, if they are doing service work as well, their training, their vacation, and things like that. So now I just want to mention that assigning the tickets in this phase is pretty typical. Most teams are going to be doing this. However, it's maybe not the purest sort of Kanban technique. So what would be considered more of a pure Kanban technique would actually leave these tickets unassigned. So you actually don't, you would prioritize these tickets, but you wouldn't actually assign them. Then what you'd find is that your technicians would all just kind of pull from the same queue of work. It can give you some really good velocity, but it's only possible once you've gotten everybody to the same sort of level of familiarity with your clients and your projects and so on. And we talk. We also do webinars about service delivery, and we actually talk more about this topic and kind of the differences and why you might choose one method over the other. We talk more about this sort of topic in our service webinars. So how do we use Kanban here? Okay, so notice in the first kind of half here, up until now, we've had the project swim lanes, but now we actually shifted over and we changed how the swim lanes are structured. Now we have swim lanes by the engineer. So for example, Terry Adams, Nicole Pinder, and so on. One swim lane for all of the engineers in your team. And now you're going to, when you decide to who to assign it to, you move it over to that person's swim lane. Now, they've already got their estimation work done, so they know kind of what are the complexity in hours or whatever you're using, and so you prioritize it here for the engineer. So Terry Adams, when he's ready to choose new work to do, he would come to this list and choose from the top, because it's not just a bucket that Terry can pick from. As a project manager, you're ranking these things here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or however you want to structure it. So Terry knows exactly what's the order to work on things. Same thing, obviously, same thing with Nicole there, and all of your engineers. So that's all you got to do. It's pretty straightforward. Choose who to do it, and then put it in their swim lane and rank it. Okay, and that brings us actually to the last phase of this project management cycle, where you're monitoring this work. Now, this is where the engineers become part of it. All the prior steps are just kind of setting up what we want to do, and this is executing it and monitoring it, and then making changes where we need to get things back on track. So, and it's not really so much of a discrete step as something you kind of do constantly. So you're kind of monitoring. Anytime you're not doing any of the other phases of the cycle, then you're going to be monitoring that work. But it shouldn't take too much time. It needs to be, obviously you've got 1,000 other things to do. So we want to make sure that you're not spending too much time monitoring this work. You're going to want to manage by exception. You don't need to worry about those tickets that are moving through this pipeline fairly quickly. Don't worry about those at all. The engineers will take care of all that stuff. But when there are exceptions, mainly things that kind of get stuck in the pipeline and they're not moving as fast through that pipeline as you want to know about those and do what you can do as a project manager to make those move forward. So these are the sorts of things that you're going to monitor for. You're going to monitor for the due date versus the progress. So if you have an approaching due date, then you want to monitor that ticket, make sure that that is going to be done by the due date. The hours logged versus the budget hours. If that kind of explodes and you end up with more hours logged or approaching the budget, you might want to know about that. Do something about that. Things that spend a long time in one of the columns. You want to know about that because that could mean that maybe it's just forgotten about, or maybe could be that the engineer is just too busy or whatever. So you want to know if it's just sitting there in the column. Now each column, as I'll show you, there's kind of what long means is kind of different for each column. A long time without a time entry or a note on the ticket or task in your PSA software, because that means that it's just not being handled. It's not going to progress. Any bottlenecks. So if one, you maybe got a team of 4 people, but one person has half of the tickets assigned to them, that's going to be a problem. You want to know about that. That person is the bottleneck. Anything that the engineer escalates because they've identified an exception with that or some sort of problem. So those are things that you're going to be monitoring for. Now, some of the quickly, some of the resolutions that you can do for that is, sometimes you can assign work to a different engineer. That's a good case if the problem is a bottleneck. This engineer is too busy, but other engineers can do the work, reassign it. If somebody, again, especially in the case of a bottleneck, sometimes you need to suspend new work assignments for an engineer. So, if they've got 10 tickets that they've started and haven't finished yet, they need to be able to work that down, and you may need to not assign anything to them for a while so that they get a chance to work that down, unless it's really urgent stuff. Sometimes you see that a ticket kind of gets delayed and you don't see much progress on it, and that's an indicator that that ticket was just too big. If you'd split it up into 2 or 3 other tickets, then you'd see progress happening on that. And so best to do that at the beginning, but if you notice that at this stage, then it's fine to split it up at that stage too. You might end up with one ticket that's actually complete, and then one much smaller ticket that is going to be worked on. And so you can visualize the progress better if you just split up that ticket. Sometimes you're just going to cancel that work. If you're waiting on the customer to respond about something, they just ghost you, or they say that it's just not important anymore. Sometimes you're just going to cancel that work. So now look, we have a lot more columns here. So this, when we get into this phase, and the engineers need a lot more columns in order to kind of indicate what they say is the progress of these tickets in your workflow. So the work starts over here. And then we see it move from the left to the right. So ready column, this is where the work waits for the engineers. They pick up new work from there. Let me explain some of these. These are pretty common columns to have. So let me explain what they mean. So scheduled is, it's not scheduled in order to get the work done. So we don't do that with Kanban, although, a lot of teams kind of still do put tickets in their calendars just for the sake of kind of managing when they get done. A lot of organizations kind of still do that, especially as a transition as they go to more Kanban methods. But what I mean by this is it's scheduled because it's got to be coordinated with somebody. So typically, you arranged a meeting. That's kind of the most common reason to put it in scheduled. So you don't need to work on that ticket until the time of that meeting comes. That's the most common reason for that. Waiting means that you probably already did something on this ticket, but you found out that you need some more information from somebody. So it's waiting on the customer, or it could be waiting on a vendor, or even a part being shipped in the mail, something like that. So there's nothing more for you to do there's nothing more for the engineer to do until something happens, the part arrives in the mail or you get some information. Now started, okay, so this is the interesting one. So basically engineers typically pull from ready and pull right over to started. Frequently this is called in progress as well, but I kind of like started because what it means is that, the engineer has some investment of work and it's kind of still in his or her court to do. So they may not be working on it at this very moment, which is kind of what in progress means, but it does indicate that it's still in their court to do. There's nothing stopping them from working on that if they chose to. And so when you see one ticket here, that's good. If you see 10 tickets, then that's kind of a problem because it means there's 10 things that they're juggling right now. And then depending on your own, like these sort of columns here are pretty common. Like almost any team can use them: ready, scheduled, waiting, or started. Now, depending on the workflows in your team, you may or may not have like a QA stage. Maybe you see a need for engineer to declare, this ticket is done, put it to a QA stage, and then some other engineer comes and checks it. Then maybe they bounce it towards a discrete acceptance stage where you tell the customer, we think this is done. Please, do your own checks on it, something like that. To be honest, not many teams actually use this stage. More would use this, and some don't use either of these. That's okay. You decide what you need. And finally, a completed stage. So when everything is totally done, it's made it all through your workflow, then the tickets land here. Now, that's how the engineers are going to work. As far as monitoring it, you want to take, review those things that I mentioned, things that you're going to monitor for, like an approaching due date or things like that. And you're going to mark these tickets up when you see that there's something on here that needs some extra attention. And that's a signal for both you and the engineers that we need to pay a bit more attention. Like maybe this one, maybe this, for example, this has a red mark because it sat in that ticket, sat in that column for a week. Okay, like why has it been there for a week? Why has nobody gotten to that? So, you can agree together, this is going to get done today or whatever. So these markings are just a great way to communicate, to remind yourself, okay, this is an exception. We need to pay more attention to this, and indicate the same thing to the engineer so that everybody's on the same page. And as far as like the methods that the engineers use to work, how do they pick off new work and things like that? That's another topic that we discuss a lot more in our service delivery webinars. Now, I just want to talk about. Actually, I already talked about that part. How we don't put work into the calendars to just for the sake of getting it done. And not when we're like that is an okay thing to do, especially if that's what you're already doing. I'm not saying that you need to stop that immediately, but the teams that use the Kanban boards for managing all the work and not the calendars, they're way more efficient than the teams that use the calendars for scheduling all that sort of stuff. Okay, yeah, so that's it actually. Identify projects, you break down the work, you estimate it, whatever it is that you need to do in the current time or sprint, you assign the work and then you monitor the work. So that can help you remember all these key stages that you need to do in part of our workflow. So, yeah, a little bit more about the engineers. And again, we talk more about this sort of thing in the service webinars. But so the engineers are gonna, they're not looking in their calendars. If you've made that change, they're just going to be looking in their own swim lane. They kind of, ideally, they're looking towards the side of the right side of the board, whatever's furthest to the right, because those are the tickets that are closest to being completed. So, we kind of focus on whatever's closest to the right side of the board in order to just actually get that done. If something is waiting in a QA stage, well, let's QA that and get it over to acceptance or completed or whatever. Don't make it wait there, so that the customer sees that value as soon as possible. If there's nothing in QA, then work on anything that you're responsible for. Get those things over to the next phase, and only when there's nothing in. Go back here. Only when there's nothing in, you've already started. There's nothing waiting that's kind kind of been freed up because you got the part in the mail or you got the information or whatever, then you can skip past that. Schedule you don't need to worry about because you'll be watching the calendar and you'll do that when it's required. Only when all those things are true, then you come over here and you pick off the top of your ready column as an engineer. So their workflow is pretty simple as well. And that maintains the low work in progress, meaning you avoid the case where the customer's, the engineer is already working on 10 different things, which is really slows them down as far as, like what do customers see as far as they, how fast does this engineer deliver this work? It appears much faster to the customer when the engineers only have one thing or two things in progress than when they have 10 things in progress. And the engineers are also, whether you use Kanban or not, they're doing all the regular professional engineer sorts of things. They're keeping the statuses up to date. They're making sure everything is correct in the PSA. They're entering their time and communicating with the clients when that's needed. And they escalate up to you or to their technical team leader if they need to. So pretty regular stuff. And sometimes they participate in the breakdown and the estimation when you need them to. Okay, and that's pretty much it. Now you might be thinking, it's all real nice, but it sounds like a lot of work to keep that Kanban boards up to date. And just doing it in the PSA, it's a lot of clicks in the project module. There's no, just a PSA, ConnectWise or Autotask alone doesn't have any visualizations to help you with this. Can't see multiple projects at once, and it's hard to monitor stuff. And if you wanted to use a third-party tool to do this, well, that can double the management overhead because now you're managing two tools, and you lose all the benefits of having all that data integrated in your PSA. So you'd be right if you're thinking those sorts of things. So that's why we built Kanban, and which we offer under TopLeft now. Basically, it gives you the best of everything because you get the Kanban boards for the visualization, the easy management. You can see multiple projects at once on a Kanban board, both at the ticket and the project level. It will help you identify those bottlenecks. It'll help you identify the neglected work, everything I mentioned. And you don't waste any time managing two different systems or entering data in two systems because everything just comes straight out of your PSA where you already have that data. Because Kanban is just a tool that connects into ConnectWise or Autotask, takes the data that's already there, and makes it useful in visualizations that your PSA doesn't offer. So I want to show you that. So I know that some of you attending today are already users, and so you'll recognize this. Others of you are not yet users, and so we'd love to show you kind of how this works. So here's an example. This is just a screenshot of a basic Kanban board. There's a lot of other ways that you can optimize this because I know we were looking at a lot of tickets or tasks here, so it's a little overwhelming, but I'll show you how you can kind of zoom in and make it a more useful view. But just as an easy overview, we're looking at our ticket data or our task data here. It's just synced out of ConnectWise or Autotask. And if you make any changes, like dragging a card from one column to another, we'll actually go out to your PSA and change that ticket or task in your PSA. So there's two-way data sync. So no one's spending any time entering data in two systems. The columns here are mapped to the statuses in your PSA, the ticket or task statuses, and not in any fixed way. It's all customizable. So you actually define exactly which columns you want, and then how the statuses that you already have are mapped to those columns. So it doesn't require you to go in and you don't have to go in and make any changes to how your PSA, your statuses are set up and things like that. Kanban will work with whatever you have already. So you can pick up these cards, you can drag and drop them to different columns, and that will change the status. You can drag them up and down, as part of putting them in the ready column and prioritizing them. You drag them up and down, and they'll just stay where you put them. You can see all of the key data on the card, the summaries, assignments with these indicators here, the time, how long it's been in the status, when was the last time entry or no, the due date, the logged hours. Yeah, so it's very, very flexible and gives you key insights here, just even on this one screen. So let me show you how we would zoom in, and I was mentioned how we always use swim lanes when we're doing project management. So here's an example of swim lanes that you just a couple of clicks to get this set up. And now we're actually seeing these tickets split up by their project. So actually this is the view that you'd normally be in when you're doing a lot of these project management tasks. So here we have like a swim lane here for CRM implementation, email migration, financial systems implementation, and it gives you a really clear view which, if for each project, if it has more tickets on the right side of the board and fewer on the left side of the board, then it's close to being complete. If it has a lot of tickets, then obviously it's a big project, and you can just see that at a glance compared to projects that have fewer tickets. So you can use all these functions that I mentioned here, like identify, do the swim lanes represent all of your project work? You can break it down. You're going to make multiple project tickets and tasks in your PSA. You can see, which ones need estimation, drag them over and set the estimate, which you do in your PSA, and then drag them over to ready, or just change the status in your PSA and the card will move on its own. You can also see it by engineer. So here's the engineer swim lane that I mentioned. In fact, we have a swim lane here for tickets that don't have anybody assigned to them. So that's a useful thing to see as well. A swim lane for first engineer, second engineer, and you can see exactly what's assigned to them and see what they say is in each status as well. Started, waiting, scheduled, ready, and so on. You can also kind of zoom in. So here's an example where it's still a project swim lane now, but now we've applied a filter. So this is representing, what we see here is all of these tickets are assigned to one specific member. Well, I mean, some of them are assigned to multiple members, but all of these tickets are assigned to a specific member. So this is really useful for them from the engineer's point of view, because they can see how the tickets are distributed in their projects that they're responsible for, but it's no noise. They don't see any tickets that they're not assigned to. So very useful for engineers. And here's sort of the kind of the inverse of that. Now we're looking at a swim lane by member board. So we're looking at who's assigned to these tickets here, but we filtered it to just show one project. So this is also useful, if you're a project manager thinking about, okay, who's actually doing the work on this project that I'm focusing on right now. This sort of view is terrific. Or maybe you bring, it's a particularly big project, so you bring it up in your team meeting and say, let's focus on this project. Who's assigned to this? What are the status of these tickets, and so on. You can identify the next neglected work, like it just does the, you set this up and it just does it for you. So it can highlight tickets that have been in one status for too long or one column in too long. You can see when the due date is approaching. It will warn you in advance of that, so you can make sure that those are being handled properly. And so it really eases your burden of figuring out which tickets should I be worrying about right now. It just kind of identifies that for you. And engineers can see it too. And ideally, that means that they can kind of, they can see this without you even getting involved. So it can save you a lot of work just when the engineers deal with it themselves, because they see all of these things as well. So here's a new feature that we recently added in the last maybe 2, maybe 3 months, is project boards. So now these cards are not representing tickets like in all of the previous shots that I showed you. Now these cards actually represent the projects as a whole. So if you've got 20 projects and you're like, I have a hard time keeping this overall status of all these projects in my head because there's 20 of them, or some MSPs have 100 of them. And so this is super valuable for that case. So you actually define columns for your project statuses. However, same thing, totally customizable. Whatever sort of columns you want, you map those to the statuses, and then you can actually see how your projects overall move through your project pipeline. Same thing, they'll still highlight for you if a project has been in a certain status for too long. Give you the red indicator here. It'll can warn for you when maybe you've set the estimated start date for that project, and that's approaching. Maybe the estimated start date is in the next 5 days. Then it can highlight that for you. And like all those thresholds for when it warns are, you can set those differently per column. Here's an example of one of the swim lanes that you can have from the when you're looking at the project boards. There's a swim lane that splits them up by their estimated start date. So you can see things like, I have two projects that are in progress that had an estimated start date back in July. So it's okay that they're still in progress. It's good that they're not new. That would be a problem if we estimated to start them in July and they're still in new. In progress is okay. And this will show you things like, maybe with your current team, you can start one project a week, but maybe you made a mistake and somehow you said that you could start 4 projects in 1 week. And that's not easy to see in ConnectWise or Autotask, but in this sort of view, you would see that immediately and you'd be like, I got to fix that because I told people I can start 4 projects in 1 week and there's no way I can do that. So I better fix that. And you can see that before you get to that week. And same thing, yeah, what I already mentioned. Things like identifying budget problems and start dates coming up. You can also, from projects, if you can, depending on how you configure it, you can click this little link here, and that will actually zoom into another Kanban board that shows you the tickets or tasks just for that project. So you can be managing at your overall project level, and then instantly kind of zoom in and manage at the ticket level for that project. So it's going to make your job so much easier compared to the tools that ConnectWise and Autotask give you. And it just reduces the clicks because everything's all in front of you. You can, in ConnectWise at least, you can show the project and service work together. You can avoid miscommunications because your whole team's looking at these same boards. Other things that I haven't even mentioned, you can assign and unassign members right in Kanban. You can dispatch to the calendar. You can enter time. So this engineers love this. You can enter time and notes right from Kanban. That'll make it, that'll make it so they actually do it throughout the day. And at least in ConnectWise right now, ConnectWise mode, you can actually customize the card appearance. So there's kind of a rules system there. You define these business rules that are totally custom to you. Change the background color depending on certain conditions of a card, give it a border and things like that. So you can really specialize and kind of focus in on things that are specific for you. You can also, in ConnectWise anyway, you can manage your sales opportunities and activities. It will be adding the sales opportunities to the Autotask mode as well. Also, customizing the card appearance is something that we're going to be adding to the Autotask mode in the future as well. So let me just show you, mention here, this is a professional project manager from one of our customers, Clear Guidance in Austin. Here's what she said. Turned project management from staring at huge lists, really difficult to prioritize, made it easily digestible, very visually compelling information. She no longer had to look at a mountain of data, wondering how to break it up. It's already broken up for them in Kanban. She said that it made the flow of tickets a lot easier to see, and mentioned how, in ConnectWise and Autotask, you can't see projects side by side, the details of those, but now they can see the project tickets together for for different projects. So very powerful. Clear Guidance is getting a lot of value from Kanban. So I just want to invite you now, if you haven't seen this in action, we want to give you a demo, and we'll talk to you about any specific requirements or questions that you have. So just go here, www.topleft.team/schedule-call, and you can choose a good time for you to see this in action. We'll get all your questions answered. Also, as a way to say thanks for attending today and for signing up quickly. Now, if you sign up by October 14th for an annual payment plan, then we'll give you 10% off the price on that plan. So that's actually 30% off of the regular monthly price. We'll also send you a copy of one of these books, either the Phoenix Project or Making Work Visible. These are books that we recommend to all of our customers. They're very, really good at just helping you understand what are some of the key techniques that really high-level teams are using to manage their work and make sure that they always are effective and efficient and giving their customers really good service. So we'd like to send you one of those books if you sign up for an annual plan by October 14th. And the code there for the shopping cart is Kanban PM 2020-09. And that's it. So for everybody who's stayed on till now, thank you. I do see a couple of questions. So if you have questions that you haven't put in the questions or the chat yet, then now's your time to put it in. I'll stay around as long as we need to, as long as there's new questions. I see a couple. So one is, how do we, so a question from Colin here, how do we schedule with the clients? So yeah, that's a good question. So there is some dispatch functionality for work that does need to be in a calendar, such as maybe you need to go on site, so um, you're gonna coordinate that with the customer. You know, you're not just gonna show up. You're gonna say, okay, tomorrow at 3, I'll be on site. So you put that into your calendar, and there is but maybe I can do this now. Maybe I can bring this up as an example. If you wait just a moment. I'll bring up our demo environment and I'll actually show you how this works. So I'm understanding that you're thinking in terms of like, how do I make a service call or make an assignment that's assigned at a certain day and time. So if I misunderstood that, just post a follow-up. But let me show you what we can do here. So this is our demo environment. And let me give you an example. Let's say that there's a variety of functions that are available here, like managing resources, assigning and assigning, and so on. And then the dispatch one, so this is what you use if you actually want to put it into your calendar, because it needs to be done at a certain time of day. So you just select your member here, who you want to assign. You can also change the ticket status. For example, if you have a rule that says if the next step to be done on a ticket is doesn't happen, well, it has to happen at a certain time of day, so it's in the calendar, then you put it in the scheduled status, then you can just do that operation right here. You can choose your date, and it's not showing here because I don't have any example data, but if James here did have some scheduled assignments already today, then it would show this in this block, and that makes it really easy for you to not double schedule somebody when they're already busy at a certain time of day. So, and then you can, actually you can just do this with a couple of clicks here. So I would schedule them in to do this ticket at 1 for 1 hour. I could just click save and it would automatically go and make that schedule assignment in ConnectWise. This is a ConnectWise example, but I won't show you, but the Autotask has basically the equivalent functionality for making service calls. So you can do that both for service tickets and project tasks. So a clarification there in as far as scheduling goes, in a pull situation, how will we know when we will be starting the work? Well, that's a good question, and the answer is you don't always know. You need to kind of look at how well. I mean, the one way for you to do it would be to look back here and see, okay, the Terry has, well, this is actually not a great example. Terry has 14 things in progress here. So as far as that goes, it's really hard to say when Terry might get to start any new work here. But this is a bad case. Ideally, you'd only have 1 or 2 things here, so that Terry's working, is finishing up stuff, and then he's going to get to new things here. So you might know, hey, Terry gets through 3 or 4 tickets a day, or 10 tickets or 20 or whatever it might be. And so if Terry's getting through 3 or 4 tickets a day, then this one's going to start within the day. Now this one's the 3rd ticket down. It might be tomorrow when this one starts. And that's kind of the level of resolution that about when these tickets are going to start. Now, if that's a real problem and the customer needs to know exactly when this starts for whatever reason, then you should put it into the scheduled column. And then it's in the calendar and you should know. Now, before you think, wow, that's really a step back from what you can do with the calendar, like calendar scheduling. Because what I've described there is with calendar scheduling, you can say, hey, here's when a ticket's going to start. But with Kanban scheduling, you can't say that quite so well. But here's why we think Kanban scheduling is superior, is because a lot of the time, even if the work is in the calendar, uh, it's just kind of a fantasy. There's a lot of things that can impact that. So even if, say this ticket said, you were using the calendar just for the purpose of managing this work, and, you said, this ticket starts at 10, this ticket starts at 1, this ticket starts at 3. There's so much that could happen in Terry's day that would prevent this ticket from happening at 3. So, maybe you have some confidence it's going to start at 3, maybe you don't, but there's a lot of things that can happen that would prevent that from actually happening. And so, and because that's actually a pretty common case, that's why we like to use Kanban scheduling, which just means we're not really concerned about exactly what time of day most of this work starts. We really, the main thing that we want to do is make sure they're in the right priority, they're ordered properly. Meaning, if you had a particularly urgent ticket, it wouldn't be the third one down. You'd make sure that it's the top one, and then Terry's going to do that one first. And that just responds so much better to the changes that happen in the real world throughout the day. Things come up, whether they're work things or personal things, Terry's got to take the afternoon off or whatever. It just kind of embraces the idea that things change fast, and instead of having to have a project manager or for in the service terms like dispatcher kind of juggling everything, and when something changes, that shifts everything back in the day, just worrying about that, we just say don't worry about it, we embrace it. And so yeah, I mean, it's true that this isn't in the calendar anywhere for most of this work, but that just kind of embraces the real world and just kind of goes with the flow. And that's really where the agile as a term, kind of where agile finds its term in this sort of management, just kind of accepting the idea that we can't plan that much. Now, the reason we can do this is because most of your project work, it doesn't matter when the ticket starts. Like the customer doesn't care if project work starts at 1 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. They don't care at all. For most of the work, it could be that some of the work needs to be done at a certain time of day, and for that, that's why we have the scheduled column for the small proportion of work that does need to be done at a certain time and day. Then go ahead and put that in the calendar, put it in the scheduled column, and don't worry about it until that time comes in the calendar. So again, this is something that we kind of talk about more in the service webinars, but that's really just the beginning of how Kanban, the idea of Kanban management for work differs from some of the other things, like the calendar scheduling specifically. Okay, let's look for some other questions here. What is the default sort on the boards? Can you customize? If you were to use it for a service team, can you sort by SLA? So right now, the default sort is just basically tickets come in with the oldest ones on the bottom. So if you don't touch these tickets at all, you just let the system do it, the the oldest tickets will be at the top. And then when you drag them from one column to another, it will just stay where you put it. So I put this one at the top here, so it's going to go at the top. If I want to re-rank it, it will do it. Now, that's how it works at the moment. But we are going to make some improvements to implement some automatic ordering of these tickets, so that you can kind of not worry about the manual ordering so much, and just define some ways that you want them to be ordered. So one way would be by the priority, the ticket priority, so that the highest priority tickets appear at the top, the lowest priority ones appear at the bottom. And one that the question mentions is the SLA, and so that's another one that we want to make available too. And then, of course, that would be more applicable to service work. SLAs aren't used so commonly in project work. For that, you're going to more look at the due dates and things like that. But it's not impossible to use project SLAs for projects, at least in ConnectWise. I don't know about Autotask. And so SLA will be one of those options too. Where to give you an idea of when that sort of function might be available, it's at the moment in our roadmap is towards the end of the upcoming quarter, so like end of the calendar year, or sort of beginning of beginning of the next calendar year. That's sort of rough idea. There's a question about how do you manage pipelines? Excuse me. Okay, so now thinking in terms of like the pipeline of all of your work here, well, this is it. Like this represents your pipeline, and all of these represent the key stages of your work. Excuse me. So you can, it's enough to just manage it by dragging it between these statuses here. Now, let me point out a kind of a specialized technique when we're thinking about pipelines. So you notice that the elements of this pipeline here are kind of, they're pretty generic. You know, like we got new, ready, scheduled, waiting in progress, and completed. Now those sorts of statuses and kind of stages in the pipeline here are going to work for almost any sort of work in any sort of team. They're very generic. In fact, that's kind of what this example board is showing is, you know, like this is service work and project work. And so I think actually the green tickets are service work and the blue tickets are project work here in this board. That's one of the kind of a customized setup. So yeah, this generic pipeline works for both service and project work. But let me see if I can find an example here of a specialized one. Yeah, let's take a look at the sales board. So typically, you know, sales people have a good understanding of their own pipeline. And so typically they are going to be using what we would call a specialized pipeline, and that gets put on a specialized board. So, and in fact, I mean, this might even just be the kind of the defaults for ConnectWise here for the stages of the sales pipeline here. So this works for sales, but it certainly also works for specialized pipelines within your team, whether it's a service team or a project team. So one way that you might see this in project work is if you are, like I mentioned, some MSPs sell the same projects over and over, like, you know, exchange migration, that sort of thing. And when you get good at that, then you know, maybe, I don't know how many stages you'd have in your particular exchange migration project pipeline, but maybe you've identified 5 or 6 or 7 key stages in that pipeline. You know, the first one is maybe get an inventory of all their users or something like that. That would be the first stage in the pipeline. And you can't progress on your exchange migration until you've inventoried the users on their existing exchange, or, you know, something like that. Well, if that's the case, then you can make a specialized board where you go beyond the, you know, new, ready, in progress, waiting, complete. So the generic status is like that. You actually lay it out kind of like this. You know, obviously your exchange migration would have its own columns, whatever the key stages for the exchange migration are. But here's an example of a specialized one for the sales. You know, someone starts out as a prospect, they go to, you know, you've qualified them, they go to quote, evaluation, you know, they're evaluating what you've presented, and finally you get to commitment. So this is a really, like, this represents your sales funnel or pipeline or whatever you want to call it. So those are the kind of the two ways to manage different, whatever pipelines you may have. And like your project team might have a few different pipelines for, you know, the 4 different types of projects, just as an example. Maybe you can, you know, repeatedly sell the 4 different types of projects, and each one of those types will have its own, could have its own Kanban board where it uses those specialized stages, and you can get a really clear view for each one. You know, where are all my different customers here, or different projects in terms of, you know, what stage are they in that certain type of project. And again, you know, within there you can still, you can always, you know, assign, well, this is a sales board, so it's a little different. But if we go back, you know, you can always enter your time. You can just drag left and right to move from a different status or whatever. So it's very, very effective and very efficient. Okay, so we have and a clarification on that. How do we plan capacity 3 months out? Yeah, that's a good question. And so the good answer that we have for that now, and like, again, this is, we didn't really have a great answer for that until we introduced the project boards not long ago. So for that, I would recommend you take a look at the projects by start date. Now you may recognize that when talking about tickets, I don't really recommend that you set the start date, because that's kind of push mode, saying that a ticket needs to start on a certain date without regard to what's happening around it. That's kind of push mode instead of pull mode. So we don't recommend that. But for exactly this purpose, it can kind of be useful to set an estimated start date for projects, for the purpose of making sure that you're kind of committing to reasonable things as a project manager for however far out you need to, a couple of weeks or 3 months, like Colin is asking about. So you set up a board like this. Again, this is our ConnectWise mode, but you can do the same thing in our Autotask mode. And so you make a board that's showing your projects. So these cards represent the individual projects, and you can set the start date on these, and then use the start date swim lane here. So now we're looking, this one had a start date of in June, June 26th. So it gets put in this week. So actually each swim lane represents a week, because you don't really need to see the detail of every individual day. And then this lets you see as far into the future as you have projects that start. Like here's one. Well, that's not that far into the future anymore. When I initially set up this board, October was pretty far in the future. But we can see out a couple weeks into the future here for the start date. But if I change the start date on this project to January or whatever, then the swim lanes would go until January automatically. And so that gives you an idea. And you can also put on budget hours, like for example here. It's showing you the budget hours that you've put in for this project, and so you can use that to compare, compare projects between each other. Because there's a major difference between a project that takes 100 hours and a project that takes 10 hours. So you do need to do that, and this gives you the ability to do that. One thing that we're going to be, and to go a little further there, you would then be able to make sure that maybe you have, depending on what your capacity is, in any week, you only have about 100 hours of projects starting, because maybe that your team can start about 100 hours of projects every week. Whether that's one 100-hour project or 10-hour projects. And so then you could kind of gauge that and make sure you only have one huge project here in a week, or maybe you have multiple smaller projects. And that's how you can kind of gauge your capacity. So you could see where I still have capacity, where maybe you've already overcommitted and you need to go back and fix that, and or get more capacity by the time you get there 3 months out. So it can tell you all that sort of thing. Now I'll give you a little teaser here. One thing that we want to do, and in fact I think, yeah, this is something that we are going to do this quarter, is add some information here. We're going to be adding kind of summarizing some of this information per swim lane and per column. So you can see here, where's a better example? I guess I don't see any columns here that have more than one column, more than one card in it. But this one here is counting up the number of cards within the column. But the number of cards is useful, but it's a little bit limited. What would be better is if we gave you some summaries of things like the number of budgeted hours here, excuse me, so that you could you wouldn't have to worry about adding up the budget hours. Like, is this project a 100-hour project, or is it a 10-hour project, and how does that affect how many projects I can start? We want to just add that up for you. So that's something we're going to be adding in this quarter. I think by the kind of the middle of the quarter, what I hope is various summaries like that. So in addition to counting the tickets here, we'd give you the ability to, we'd automatically add up the budget hours for all the tickets that are here, and not just in the column, but also in the whole swim lane as a whole. And so that would make that part of your job so much easier. And not just on the project side, but for tickets as well, because that would be Very useful. Say we go to the project manager. So we're not showing the projects. We're going to be showing the tickets, but they're by the member. So that would show us things like how many hours are in the budget for, how many hours, instead of just number of tickets, how many estimated hours have I scheduled out for Terry? And if that's 5 times the number of hours that I've scheduled out here for, or assigned to Joseph, well, maybe that's a problem, and maybe I can make that a lot more even by moving some of the tickets back and forth. So that sort of thing will be coming for the ticket side too, and that's going to make certain elements of a project manager or like dispatcher's job much easier. Okay, so we have some other tickets here. Questions. Let's get to someone else's questions. From Eric, has a questions about how do you handle tickets that take multiple days? Like 15 minutes a day for 7 days with some days skipped in between. 15 minutes a day, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Yeah, that's a good question. Let me tell you one thing that we do in our own Kanban boards. It's not the exact same case, but it might give you some ideas. Is in a lot of projects, you'll have some tickets that are they're just kind of ongoing. Like maybe a ticket for meetings or a ticket for overall planning stuff. And like you don't want to make a different. Well, I mean, some people do, but a lot of people don't really want to make a dedicated ticket like for every weekly meeting. You don't have to have a dedicated ticket for every weekly meeting for people to put their time on. So sometimes you just want to have one ticket, for the entire project or whatever. So what we do is we make a status called ongoing, and we put a column on our Kanban boards. What like you could do it anywhere, but what we do is that we put it over farthest column on the left, and it's called ongoing, and it has all the ongoing. You map the ongoing status to that, and then and then it just kind of stays over here on the left. And so then it's not a perfect Kanban board because the column on the left is kind of special, and you expect all the tickets for most of the board to be moving from the left to the right as you complete them. But the ones in the furthest left column, that there's no expectation that they move towards the right. They just kind of stay there on the left side, and that can be useful to for those sorts of tickets that just kind of stay open for a long time. Now for us, it's open for us. We like build a special different project every quarter in our ConnectWise environment, just so that tickets don't get too many time entries on them, and they stay open forever, things like that. So those tickets for us would stay open for a quarter. Could you use that sort of technique for tickets that stay open for a week? I think you could. Maybe you just give them a special status and special column. Like if they're that important to you, then go ahead and make a special column for that. Put it wherever you want. Call it whatever you want. Your weekly tickets or something like that. And and then they stick there. And then you could still make use of some of this. For example, highlighting like this, where we're highlighting here a ticket that's been open for 1 week, is highlighted in red because it's over the threshold that we set. So even on a column like that, if you know that tickets shouldn't be there for more than a week, you could still set that highlighting and alert when it's been there for 7 days or 8 days or whatever. And then you'd still be notified if that ticket kind of stays open longer than the week that you'd expect it to be there. Yeah, hope that is a useful idea. Another question from Eric. We were taught by C-level that if we do calendar scheduling, that way engineers are taught to pay attention to their calendar, and that way the CEO of the big client needs help exactly at 12:15 on his lunch break, the engineer is ready. Yeah, so he's referring there to C-level operations, a fairly well-known like ConnectWise MSP consultant there. Yeah, and they're definitely very big on the calendar scheduling, and they're not wrong in that. Putting things in the calendar does allow you to do that. So if you need to meet with the the CEO at 12:15, then it is in the calendar. it does allow you to do that. But using that same technique for the other work that doesn't require that is a lot of overhead. For example, if you put one, like say you have a series of tickets that are going to take 1 hour, and they, so you put dispatcher, project manager puts them in for 1, 2, 3, and 4 o'clock. Then what happens if the first ticket takes 90 minutes? Well, then you got a bit of a problem, because either the engineer has to stop working on that ticket at 2 to go work on that next ticket, and then he or she is left with a ticket that is unfinished. And that's what makes your team look really unresponsive, is when you stop working on a ticket just because the calendar said so. And then someone's got to go and put that into the calendar again. So it's a lot of work. Or the engineer just ignores the calendar and they don't stop working on that ticket. But now the ticket that was supposed to start at 2, what do you do with that? Someone's got to put that back into the calendar. Maybe they got to shift everything back by an hour, and including the one that was supposed to start at 4, it gets shifted back to the next day. So it's just a lot of work. If most of your work doesn't need to be in the calendar. So if the CEO wants help at 12:15, go ahead, put it in the calendar for 12:15. But for the work that no one really cares about when it happens, you don't need to put it in the calendar. And, that's our opinion. Certainly C-levels, successfully taught people to use the calendar scheduling, and that's consistent with what ConnectWise teaches, the paint your day green and that sort of thing, paint your calendar green. But we've found that so you can still do that technique for the work that really matters, where it really needs that technique, but using other techniques for the work where it doesn't matter just makes your life so much easier. Another question here is there a way to add up all the time estimated on 20 tickets a project so that we can see that it adds up to 100 hours? Then as the engineer puts in time, as in the engineer does 4 hours of work, it shows as only needing 96 hours left. Okay, so there's not exactly that option. Let me show you what we do, though. The closest that we get right now, if we go to a project swim lane, and so this is a view that you've probably already seen. Yeah, so here's an example here. We are showing you some information, not in exactly the same way that you mentioned, but it is some of the same information. So, and this information is the most, well, you get this bit here, the scheduled information, when you are using that calendar. To the extent that you use the calendar scheduling option, then you'll see this this part here. So we can see that the budget on this whole project, because this is in the header of the swim lane, which represents the whole project. So we got 34 hours there, and we've actually logged almost 27 hours. So it's not telling you that you've got a certain number of hours left, but you can still do that calculation. And you know what, if it turns out that we could certainly do that, I just don't know that we've ever had a customer that actually had used it, and they come and they're like, it would be so much more useful if it did this. I just don't know if someone has actually asked that, so that's maybe why we haven't done it yet. But certainly we could. This is what you got now, and you can certainly make that request as a customer. We can see what we could do. Okay, I think that covers all the questions that I've seen so far. I'm gonna stick around for just another minute or two. See that we have, yeah, so we're at 12 now. I will stick around for another couple minutes in case anybody wants to put a couple more questions in there. If not, thanks everybody for attending. Maybe we'll see you next month for our service webinar that we'll do. And once again, just if you are looking to find out more about how Kanban can specifically help you, you want to ask your other questions, and see it in action, go here, and you can put a demo in the calendar for us. Okay, folks, seeing no more questions, I'll finish up this webinar. Thanks again for attending. Have a good day.